All right, cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle tissue is found only in the heart. Cardiac muscle cells are usually the small size, so, 0.01 centimeters long. They're smaller than skeletal muscle fibers that, remember, on average are 2 to 3 centimeters long. The cells are branched and they only have one central nucleus. Cardiac muscle cells have myofibrils and sarcomeres like skeletal muscle fibers, and they appear striated or striped, just like skeletal muscle fibers do. They do not have any myosatellite cells, sadly, so cells that are lost cannot be replaced. That's why myocardial infarctions are so devastating. Cardiac muscle cells contract around 60 times per minute or 60 beats per minute. They must have a consistent energy supply because they never get the night off. They beat like this from the moment that we are in utero with our heart first developing all the way until the moment that we die. So constant work. Therefore, they have an excellent blood supply and plentiful myoglobin. They have many mitochondria that use many aerobic metabolic pathways to produce a lot of ATP. And in this way, they're a little bit like slow skeletal muscle fibers. In addition, cardiac muscles contain a large amount of glycogen and lipids as energy reserves. In this way, they're similar to fast skeletal muscle fibers that also contain a lot of glycogen. Cardiac muscle cells are connected by intercalated discs. The word intercalated means position between. All right. So it's like kind of a weird word. It doesn't show up much, but here it is. The disc that lies between the cardiac muscle cells, intercalated discs. Okay, and we're going to go take a deep dive into the structure of an intercalated disc. So intercalated discs have three structures that connect the cells. Desmosomes, fascia adherens, and gap junctions show up again. Remember I said that gap junctions would show up in skeletal muscle? Well, here they are. Okay, so I'm going to talk about each of the different types of intercellular connections. Okay, so first, desmosomes. Desmosomes are protein structures that tightly bind one cardiac muscle cell to another. The desmosomes are found between them and prevent them from separating during contractions. Fascia adherens are specialized protein structures that bind cardiac cells to each other. And in the fascia adherens, the actin filaments in the cell are anchored to the plasma membrane, and then the actin filaments of adjacent cardiac cells are connected to one another by structures that lie beyond the cell membrane of both of them. And this connection allows cardiac muscle cells to contract together in a coordinated manner, that all of the little sarcomeres and myofibrils are working together. Gap junctions are the third protein structure that binds cardiac cells to each other. And as we have learned, gap junctions have passageways or gaps that allow fluids, ions, and small molecules to pass freely between the cells. In the heart, changes in ion concentrations create the electrical impulse or action potential that causes a contraction. Therefore, by creating a flow of ions between cardiac muscles, gap junctions create an electrical connection between the cardiac cells. Due to the gap junctions, the stimulation of one cell will stimulate several others, and then the contraction will spread throughout the heart. Because of this, cardiac muscles functions as a syncytium, or like a single cell with multiple nuclei, which is what a syncytium is. Cardiac muscle cell contractions are initiated by the firing of pacemaker cells, which are specialized cardiac muscle cells. The brain does not initiate the heart contractions. However, the autonomic nervous system, which is part of the brain, influences the function of the heart. So cardiac muscle is involuntary muscle that is not under conscious control, but can be influenced by parts of the brain. that deal with emotion. And, if you get scared, your heart beats fast, for example. Okay, so smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is found in the respiratory, digestive, urinary, and reproductive tracts, in the wall of blood vessels and lymph vessels, in the erectopili muscles of the skin, and in the interocular muscles of the eye. Smooth muscles are involuntary muscles. They are not under conscious control. Smooth muscle cells are small. They're only 0.01 centimeters or so. So they're more like a typical cell than a skeletal muscle fiber is. They have a single central nucleus. And luckily, smooth muscle cells can divide and recover from injuries, which we wish we could say that about the heart cells. Smooth muscle contains thin actin filaments and thick myosin filaments, but they do not have sarcomeres and they do not appear striated. The thin filaments are attached to dense bodies rather than to Z lines, and the dense bodies are attached to the cell membrane and a network of intermediate filaments throughout the cell. Intermediate filaments are part of the cytoskeleton of the cell. When smooth muscle cells contract, the thick filaments pull on the thin filaments pull on the dense bodies, and the dense bodies pull on the network of intermediate filaments. The network of intermediate filaments is drawn together and the cell shortens. Smooth muscle cells are able to contract as strongly as skeletal and cardiac muscle cells, even though they have a nice little innocent name that they're smooth. They create really powerful contractions. They create labor pains, which are famously painful. They create menstrual cramps. They create the intestinal cramps that we associate with gastroenteritis. Okay, and any time that you've ever had gas. So smooth muscle must function for long periods without rest. Blood vessels, primarily arteries and arterioles, maintain a continuous slight level of contraction or baseline tone. But luckily, smooth muscle cells do not require a lot of energy to function. Some smooth muscle cells, like those in the wall of blood vessels, are stimulated by the central nervous system, specifically the autonomic nervous system, to contract. Some smooth muscle cells in the digestive tract are stimulated by central nervous system innervation and also by pacemaker cells. Other smooth muscle cells in the digestive tract are stimulated only by pacemaker cells that undergo spontaneous depolarizations, just like in the heart. With both types of stimulus, the impulse is spread through adjacent cells through gap junctions. So here they are again. They were in the heart, now they're in the smooth muscle of the intestines. When one smooth muscle cell contracts, the contraction spreads like a wave that travels through the tissue. The contraction of smooth muscle cells in the digestive tract creates waves of peristalsis that move the contents in the lumen of the tract forward. Okay, so that's happening. So that's cool. And that is the end of that. So I'll stop share.